How does a legendary outlaw, a name whispered in fear across the frontier, actually meet their end? You might picture a blaze of glory, a dramatic last stand against 100 lawmen with guns blazing. Truth be told, the reality was often a lot stranger, messier, and way more shocking than the stories you have heard. Believe it or not, one of the most famous gunslingers of all time was taken down while he was dusting a picture on his wall. 1. Jesse James. Everybody knows the name Jesse James. He was the most famous train and bank robber in American history. For years, he and his brother Frank led their gang on a spree that made them legends. They were ghosts, always one step ahead of the law. Jesse was so famous that people all over the country read about his adventures in dime novels. He seemed like he was invincible, like he could never be caught. He was smart, he was bold, and people thought he would go on forever. But here is the kicker. Jesse James was not brought down by a posse of sheriffs or a clever detective. His story ended in his own living room. He was living under a fake name, trying to lay low. One of his own gang members, a young man named Robert Ford, wanted the huge reward on Jesse's head. On a warm day in April 1882, Jesse was unarmed. He stood on a chair to straighten a crooked picture on the wall. With his back turned, Robert Ford saw his chance. He pulled his weapon and ended the life of the most famous outlaw in America. It was a cowardly act that shocked everyone. Betrayal by a friend is a terrible way to go. But what if your end came not from a traitor, but from a determined lawman who found you hiding in a dark room when you least expected it? 2. Billy the Kid. Billy the Kid was the rock star of the Wild West. He was young, he was charming, and he was lightning fast with a six-shooter. His real name was probably Henry McCarty, but nobody called him that. He was just the Kid. He became famous during a violent conflict in New Mexico known as the Lincoln County War. He was on the run for most of his short life, but he always had a smile on his face and a joke on his lips. He escaped from jail so many times it became his signature move. People thought he was impossible to catch. After his last big escape, Billy went to hide out with some friends in a place called Fort Sumner. A tough lawman named Pat Garrett, who actually used to be friendly with Billy, was hunting him down. One night, Billy walked into a dark bedroom to get some meat for a late-night snack. He was barefoot and only carrying a knife. To his complete surprise, Pat Garrett was waiting in that dark room. Billy could not see who it was and asked in Spanish, "¿Quién es?" which means, "Who is it?" Garrett did not answer with words. He answered with 2 shots from his gun, and the legend of Billy the Kid was over in an instant. Billy the Kid was caught completely by surprise. But our next outlaw was a hardened gunslinger who saw his end coming from a mile away, just not from where he thought it would. 3. John Wesley Hardin. John Wesley Hardin was not like other outlaws. He was not a bank robber. He was a stone-cold gunslinger, and many people say he was the most dangerous man of his time. He was known for having a very short temper. The stories say he took out his first man when he was only 15 years old. Over the years, he was in countless shootouts and always came out on top. He was so good with a gun that he even developed a special move where he could draw and fire from holsters sewn into his vest. He spent a lot of time in prison, but he eventually got out and tried to live a normal life. That normal life did not last long. Hardin ended up in El Paso, Texas, where his reputation followed him. One evening, he was in the Acme Saloon playing dice. An off-duty lawman named John Selman, whose son Hardin had recently argued with, walked in behind him. Selman did not give Hardin a chance. He fired a shot into the back of Hardin's head. Just to be sure, he fired 3 more times as Hardin lay on the floor. The deadliest gunslinger of his time never even saw it coming. The man who always faced his opponents head-on was taken out from behind. Being shot from behind is a shocking end. But what about 2 outlaws whose final chapter is a complete mystery? A puzzle that nobody has ever solved. 4. Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. Butch Cassidy was the leader, the brains of the operation. His real name was Robert Leroy Parker. He was famous for planning clever robberies and for trying to avoid violence whenever he could. His best friend and partner was Harry Longabaugh, better known as the Sundance Kid. Sundance was the muscle, a quick-tempered man who was a crack shot with a pistol. Together, they led a gang called the Wild Bunch, and they were the most successful train robbers of their era. They were so successful, in fact, that the law started closing in on them from all sides. To escape the pressure, Butch and Sundance, along with Sundance's partner Etta Place, fled to South America. They tried to live a quiet life as ranchers in Argentina, but old habits die hard. Soon they were back to robbing banks. And here is where the story gets foggy. The official tale is that they were cornered by soldiers in a small town in Bolivia called San Vicente in 1908. After a long shootout, surrounded, and with no hope of escape, they chose to end things on their own terms rather than be captured. But here is the thing: nobody is completely sure. Some people, including their own families, claimed they survived and returned to the United States to live out their lives in secret. Their end remains one of the Wild West's greatest unsolved mysteries. A mysterious ending leaves a lot of questions. But our next Outlaw's final moments are crystal clear and have become the most famous card game in history. 5. Wild Bill Hickok. James Butler Hickok, known to the world as Wild Bill, was a true frontier legend. He was a lawman, a scout, a showman, and one of the most famous duelists ever to walk the dusty streets of the West. He was known for his long, flowing hair and his 2 ivory-handled pistols, which he wore with the butts facing forward. Stories of his shootouts were told and retold, making him a living legend. He was the kind of man who seemed larger than life, a hero from a storybook. By 1876, his eyesight was starting to fail, and he had settled down in the rowdy gold rush town of Deadwood, South Dakota. On August 2, 1876, Wild Bill was playing poker in a saloon. He usually insisted on sitting with his back to the wall so he could see the entrance, but on this day, another player refused to move, so Bill sat with his back to the door. A down-on-his-luck gambler named Jack McCall walked in, pulled out a pistol, and shot Wild Bill in the back of the head, ending his life instantly. The reason why McCall did it is still debated. When he fell, Wild Bill was holding a hand of 2 black aces and 2 black eights. To this day, that poker hand is known as the dead man's hand. Wild Bill was taken down by a nobody. His friend, another legendary gunslinger, had a very different kind of ending, one that nobody, especially him, ever saw coming. 6. Doc Holliday. John Henry Holliday, or Doc as everyone called him, was a dentist from Georgia. But when he was diagnosed with a terrible lung sickness, he moved out west, hoping the dry air would help him. Out west, he became something else entirely, a gambler and a gunfighter. He was skinny, coughed all the time, and had a nasty temper, but he was fiercely loyal to his friends, especially the famous lawman Wyatt Earp. Doc was right there with Earp at the legendary shootout at the OK Corral. He spent his life expecting to meet his end in a cloud of gunsmoke, always ready for the next fight. But that is not what happened. After years of fighting and running, Doc's sickness finally got the better of him. He ended up in a hotel in Glenwood Springs, Colorado, seeking treatment from the hot springs there. He was weak and confined to his bed. On the morning of November 8, 1887, he knew the end was near. He asked for a glass of whiskey. As he lay there, he looked down at his bare feet in disbelief. The legend is that his last words were, "This is funny." He had gone through his whole life expecting to be brought down in a gunfight with his boots on. Instead, he met his end peacefully in a bed, something he never would have predicted. Doc's peaceful end was a huge surprise. But our next outlaw did not just have a surprising end, he simply vanished into thin air, leaving everyone to wonder what happened. 7. Black Bart. Black Bart was an outlaw of a different kind. His real name was Charles Bowles, and he was a gentleman robber. He robbed stagecoaches, but he never once fired his gun. He was polite to his victims and was known for his deep voice and scary appearance. He often wore a long coat and a flour sack over his head with eye holes cut out. And get this, after some of his robberies, he would leave behind a poem signed Black Bart the P.O.8. He was a mystery, a phantom who haunted the stagecoach routes of California for years. After nearly a decade of robbing, Black Bart finally made a mistake. He dropped a handkerchief at a crime scene, and the laundry mark on it led detectives right to him. They discovered he was not a scary outlaw at all, but a well-dressed older gentleman living in San Francisco. He was sent to prison, but was let out early for good behavior. After he was released, he was followed by the law, who suspected he would rob again. He seemed to be getting old and tired. And then, one day, he just disappeared. Nobody knows for sure what happened to him. Some say he went off to live a quiet life. Others think he was secretly paid by the stagecoach company to stop robbing them. He just walked away and was never seen again. Black Bart vanished like a ghost. But the next outlaw on our list, a famous woman, met a very real and violent end that remains a mystery to this very day. 8. Belle Starr. Myra Maybelle Shirley, better known as Belle Starr, was called the Bandit Queen. The newspapers loved to write stories about her, making her sound like the leader of a huge gang of dangerous outlaws. Truth be told, she was more involved with criminals than a big-time criminal herself. She was friends with the James Younger gang and lived in an area known as Robber's Roost because so many outlaws would hide out there. She was smart, a good shot, and she knew how to handle herself in a tough world. She was famous for her style, often riding her horse side saddle while wearing a velvet dress and a feathered hat. Her flashy life came to a shocking end just 2 days before her 40th birthday. She was riding home from a neighbor's house when someone ambushed her from the bushes. She was blasted off her horse with a shotgun. After she fell to the ground, the attacker shot her again to make sure the job was done. Who did it? Well, that is the mystery. Some people suspected her new husband, who was much younger than her. Others thought it might have been her own son, whom she had recently had a big fight with. Or it could have been an angry neighbor. The case was never solved, and the identity of who brought down the Bandit Queen is still a secret. Belle Starr's end was a classic whodunit. Our next outlaw, however, knew exactly who betrayed him, because his friend led the lawmen right to his doorstep. 9. Sam Bass. Sam Bass was a classic Texas outlaw. He started out as a cowboy, but he found that robbing trains and stagecoaches was a lot more profitable. In 1877, he and his gang pulled off one of the biggest train robberies in history. They stole $60,000 in brand new gold coins, which would be millions of dollars today. Suddenly, Sam Bass was the most wanted man in Texas. The famous Texas Rangers were on his trail, and he had to stay on the move constantly, a folk hero to some and a villain to others. The pressure was on, and Sam planned one last big score, a bank robbery in the town of Round Rock. What he did not know was that one of his own gang members, a man named Jim Murphy, had made a deal with the law. Murphy betrayed Sam, telling the Rangers every detail of the plan. As Bass and his men rode into town, the Rangers were waiting for them. A massive shootout erupted in the streets. Sam was badly wounded but managed to escape. He was found the next day, resting under a large tree by a group of local citizens. He did not have much time left and passed away the next day, which happened to be his 27th birthday. Sam Bass was brought down by a traitor. But the next outlaw on our list was a tough gang leader who met his end in a face-to-face showdown with a legendary lawman. 10. Bill Doolin. Bill Doolin was a tough customer. He rode for a while with the famous Dalton gang, but he missed their disastrous final raid because his horse came up lame. That piece of luck allowed him to form his own gang, the Wild Bunch, not to be confused with Butch Cassidy's group. They were one of the most powerful and feared gangs in the late 1800s, robbing banks and trains all over Oklahoma and Arkansas. Doolin was a good leader and was known for being a straight shooter. He was so notorious that the government hired 3 of the best lawmen of the time, the 3 Guardsmen, to hunt him and his gang down. Doolin was eventually captured and put in jail. But, like many outlaws, he did not stay there long. He managed to escape. He tried to hide out with his wife and son, hoping to start a new life. But one of the famous lawmen hunting him, Heck Thomas, was relentless. He tracked Doolin to a small town called Lawson. As Doolin approached his wagon one dark night, Thomas stepped out from the shadows and called his name. Doolin went for his gun, but it was too late. Heck, Thomas raised his shotgun and ended the life of the famous gang leader right there. Bill Doolin went down in a blaze of glory. But our next outlaw's end was far more gruesome, and his story after he was gone is one of the weirdest tales in the entire Old West. 11. Big Nose, George Parrott. George Parrott, better known as Big Nose George because of his large nose, was a small-time cattle rustler and highwayman. He was not super famous like Jesse James, but he and his gang made a huge mistake that put them on the map. They tried to derail a train to rob it, but their plan was discovered. In the chase that followed, they ended up taking the lives of 2 lawmen. That act made them wanted men, and the law would stop at nothing to bring them to justice. George was eventually caught in Montana. As they were transporting him back by train, word got out. When the train stopped, an angry mob of townspeople grabbed him. They threw a rope over a telegraph pole and tried to hang him, but the rope broke. The second time, the rope broke again. The third time, they made him stand on a barrel under the rope. When they kicked the barrel out, the rope held, but George managed to get his hands and feet on the pole. It took a long time for him to pass. But that is not even the craziest part. After he was gone, a doctor took his body and, believe it or not, made a pair of shoes out of his skin and used the top of his skull as an ashtray. An ending that bizarre is hard to top. But the next outlaw's final moments were shocking for a different reason. It was a public spectacle that many people believed was a grave injustice. 12. Tom Horn. Tom Horn was a man of many talents. He was an Army scout, a cowboy, and a Pinkerton detective. He was known for being incredibly good at tracking people. If you were on the run, Tom Horn was the last person you wanted on your trail. Later in life, he started working as a hired gun for wealthy cattle barons who wanted to stop smaller ranchers and homesteaders from settling on their land. He was a range detective, but his job was to scare people off, and if they did not scare, to make them disappear. Horn was accused of ending the life of a 14-year-old boy named Willie Nickel, supposedly mistaking him for his father. The evidence against him was shaky, and it was mostly based on a confession he supposedly made while he was intoxicated. Many people believed he was framed. Despite the doubts, he was found guilty and sentenced to hang. On the day of his hanging in 1903, he was calm and composed. The hanging was done with a new, complicated machine. He stood on the gallows, almost stoic, and met his end in front of a crowd of onlookers, many of whom would always believe an innocent man had just been put down. Tom Horn's end was controversial. But our next outlaw's final chapter was a pure, old-fashioned Wild West shootout against one of the most famous lawmen of all time. 13. Curly Bill Brocious. Curly Bill Brocious was a notorious outlaw and leader of a group known as the Cowboys in Arizona. They were a loose-knit gang of cattle rustlers and troublemakers who often clashed with the Earp brothers and their friend Doc Holliday. Curly Bill was known for his wild sense of humor and his dangerous temper, especially when he was drinking. He was a key figure in the events that led up to the famous shootout at the OK Corral. After that shootout, the conflict between the Cowboys and the Earps exploded into a full-on vendetta. Wyatt Earp and his posse were on a mission of revenge after his brother Morgan was ambushed and his life was ended. They were hunting down everyone they held responsible. One morning, they surprised a group of cowboys, including Curly Bill, at a place called Iron Springs. As soon as Curly Bill saw Wyatt Earp, he grabbed his shotgun. Earp and Brocious fired at almost the same time. The bullets from the cowboys ripped through Wyatt's coat and hit his saddle, but he was not harmed. Wyatt's shot, however, was true. It struck Curly Bill, and the fearsome leader of the cowboys fell, his reign of terror over in a flash of gunfire. A one-on-one duel with Wyatt Earp is a legendary way to go. But the end of our next outlaw is a complete puzzle, a death so strange it looks like one thing, but might be something else entirely. 14. Johnny Ringo. Johnny Ringo was another member of the Arizona Cowboys. He had a reputation as an educated and well-read man, which was unusual for an outlaw. He was also known for being moody and having a dark side. He was a dangerous gunfighter, and his name was often linked with some of the worst deeds of the Cowboys. He was a bitter enemy of the Earp brothers and Doc Holliday, and legends say he and Doc were always on the verge of a duel that never happened. After the Earps left Arizona, Johnny Ringo's story took a mysterious turn. A little while later, his body was found sitting at the base of a large tree in a remote part of Arizona. He had a single bullet hole in his temple, and his own pistol was found in his hand. At first glance, it looked like he had taken his own life. But a lot of things did not add up. His boots were gone, and there were some other strange details about the scene. Many people, including his friends, never believed he would do such a thing. They whispered that he had been taken out by one of his many enemies, perhaps Wyatt Earp or Doc Holliday, coming back to settle one last score. His true end remains a topic of debate for historians.